Welcome to a Wonder Junkie podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Anderson.
Nobody knows what's going on. Nobody knows. Nobody has the faintest idea. The best guesses are lies. You may be sure of it.
Well, I appreciate you joining me today. I've been really enjoying listening to you speak and reading some of your work online, and I've had a lot of guests on this show who study consciousness from different vantage points, Carl Friston and Anil Seth and others who have many different perspectives on the nature of consciousness. And it seems like a lot of you guys agree about a lot of things, and then there's a lot of subtle disagreements. And I thought it would be fun to have you on and to share what you're discovering in your labs and in your studies, because it seems to be very fascinating, these ideas about qualia and IIT and things like that. So here we are. I would love for you to just introduce yourself to the audience, people who haven't heard of you, and just sort of give a brief introduction to what you're doing and who you are, if you don't mind.
Okay. So my name is Nao Tsuchiya. I'm a professor in Monash University, psychological science, and my main interest as a scientist is to discover or clarify the nature of the consciousness and its relation to physical substrate. So sometimes it's called also the hard problem of consciousness, and that's what I'm interested in doing science about. And in terms of my background, I got a PhD in Caltech in the United States, working with one of the sort of the foundation for recent movement of the consciousness studies, Christoph Koch, who also worked with Francis Crick, who discovered the DNA. And then after that, I became a postdoc in Caltech again, and working on with patients and so on with Ralph Adolphs. And then after that, I came to Australia pretty much, brief study in Japan for one year. But after that, I came to Monash University in 2012. And then since then, I'm here. And also, with respect to the Qualia, qualitative aspects of consciousness, which is the main focus of my interest right now. This is the project that is funded by Japanese Society for Promotion of Science. And since 2023, we have received a kind of a group funding for many researchers. And there we are trying to study qualia, which was thought to be non-scientific at some point, but we are trying to make it scientific.
Yeah. And why is it so non-scientific to some people, and why is it so hard to get people to want to explore this idea of qualia?
So this is rooted in many bits of the philosophical consideration of the qualia, but also related to some extent, the linguistic studies of consciousness or language itself as well. For example, if you're watching this, video, you'll see my, freeze here as a red, right now.
Mm-hmm.
And then the problem for the philosopher has been that, okay, so you experience this as something what you call as a red, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I also called this as a red. But when you say this as a red, what does it mean? I mean, am I experiencing the same this quality as you do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or maybe you are experiencing something different, but because of the upbringing and also the culture and also education and also, agreement throughout the, development, you may actually just call this as red, but, what actually you're experiencing may be different.
Yeah.
But indeed, it's likely to be the case that, something is different between us.
Mm-hmm.
But, if the report about experience is something that is very categorical and so poor to capture everything about what we experience, this is the kind of limit of scientific kind of investigation to characterize and also investigate our own internal experience.
Yeah.
And if you go even farther, then you realize that calling it as red is even not making sense at all, because you can doubt. And indeed, this is happening right now, that if you show something like this, freeze to GPT, right? And then they say that, oh, this is red. Does it mean that they are experiencing this redness? Right? This is very unclear.
Right. Yeah, this has been an interesting question of mine. Even when I was young, I remember being small and questioning this, like, all right, we're all calling it something and we're caught in this linguistic model. And we do this with so many things. But subjectively, the conscious experience is so much more rich. And each one of us is so unique. And I love that you're studying this. I did watch one of your talks about the color red, and it goes really deep into this. But let's go a little further into, when did you first start getting really curious about the nature of consciousness? Were you little? Is that when it began?
Yes. So when I was a kid, actually like 5 years ago, 5 years of old, my the dearest friend actually died for just a flu, I think, at that time. And that was a very sad event and a sad experience, but also it also influences my philosophy, or sort of the thing that stoic kind of idealism, that idea that anything can happen at the moment, and you want to maximize your life, right? But at the same time, what was very disturbing to me was the adults surrounding me gave me some kind of a nonsensical explanation, like oh, this boy went to become like a star. And this is a kind of story to convince children to, in a sense, believe in or assuming some kind of existence of soul, right? And then but at the time I thought that if this is the case, then why is it the case that the star doesn't increase while I'm watching? Because everybody somewhere in the world is continuously dying, right? But it's not increasing while I'm seeing it. And so what happens to the animals that dies as well? So all of these things actually started to make me wonder the explanation about the consciousness after the death, or also the consciousness before I became actually conscious, in that sense. And that was the first moment. And the second moment was when I was a junior high school. My another friend, completely different person, of course, told me that his another friend, in a sense, confessed to him that he was colorblind, or a red-green colorblind. At that time, he just realized that. But because this my friend and also that friend's friend were brought up almost like from extremely young age, and then talked about all the experience and the playing things in the same way, and also games and also sports and so on throughout all the history of 10 years to 12 years, and he didn't notice anything about his color experience. So then he became extremely kind of confused that, oh, maybe that means that everything that I experience may be actually different to other people, but I don't notice it. And he and I discussed about whether it's possible that I'm experiencing red like this way, but he is actually experiencing this as what I call green. And then, is it possible to prove or disprove one is correct or the not? And we discussed a lot, but at that time I had an intuition that we should be able to actually address it eventually. At the time I was not a scientist, but some kind of mathematics or physics should be able to prove this way or that way. But I didn't have any idea for a really long time until relatively recently. That's the paper that is my read, your read. That's just first step towards this kind of question. But it was one of my first two events to make me interested in consciousness.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Were you in an environment with your parents and teachers, and did you have a lot of people supporting this curiosity and wonder when you were younger that allowed this progression into becoming so enamored with consciousness and going further and further? Or when did it really become a bit more serious?
I don't think so. I was brought up in Japan, and in a sense, I was very out. I realized that I'm a kind of outlier from a
Mm,
really early stage. I tended to doubt everything that teacher said, whereas other students, especially in Japan, tend to believe what the teacher says, right? But
hmm.
I always ask the question, and I always doubt their assumptions until I'm convinced.
Yeah.
So I was pretty bad in that sense that in especially liberal arts type subjects, or subject, especially history was the worst for me, because anything that I can confirm around me is really far from what I'm taught, right? Especially about the world history.
Yeah.
I can never confirm anything.
Sure.
So I doubted, and then I questioned the most fundamental question, and that stopped the lectures all the time. And then teacher really got annoyed about me. So I was probably never kind of supported in that sense of that curiosity.
Yeah.
But because of this suppression, maybe I just in a sense, in response to this suppression, I
Yeah.
became more curious, or
I love
more
that.
determined to be a scientist.
It's almost like Richard Feynman would say, questioning and doubting is the most important quality of a scientist or of anyone who's really trying to be curious. And you have to question and doubt. It never really ends. So I love that. And then you chose to not go down the physics avenue as much, or to go down the biology. Like some people choose these specific avenues, and you chose to go after the brain. Is
Hmm.
that because you realized that if I want to understand the nature of history and the nature of all these things, that this is the most important place to begin, right?
Yes, and in that sense, I was actually very interested, and I really liked about math, physics, and also biology when I was at high school. And then thinking about what kind of thing I want to do as a scientist or mathematician. I thought at the time that the core of the Earth is something that is not something that no anybody has seen or checked, right? So that's
Mm-hmm.
very interesting. And also the brain, the mystery about the brain is also something that is so weird and also interesting. So that's was another thing. And also the many mysteries about, or questions about mathematics was also something that was very interesting. But at the time when I entered in the university, Kyoto University, it's one of the good ones. Then I realized that for math, there are so many talented people around the same age, and I can't just compete with them, right? It's doomed.
Mm.
And also the physics-related questions, like let's say the origin of the matters or origin of the universe and so on. That's interesting, but it's also not something that I can directly verify. And so that's not so interesting. And the biology is also, if it's about something not about me but about let's say rats or mouse or monkeys, it's interesting in itself, but it doesn't tell me anything about myself directly.
Mm.
So all of this direct knowledge or direct experience is always kind of underlying curiosity for me. And like my own sexual desire or my own happiness or anger, where does it come from? All of this
Mm.
eventually led me to question the brain and the consciousness.
Yeah, awesome. I'd love to go into Qualia a bit more and learn about what you've been discovering, and then talk about many other things here. I've got a list of things that I'm always curious about, like memory and
Mm,
anesthesia and fear and
mm,
risk aversion, all these things that make us
mm,
human,
mm,
and like what you're discovering in the labs and in your
mm,
studies by the subjectivity, but also measuring it and using mathematics and using all of
mm,
this information theory that you have.
mm, mm.
So maybe we start with qualia, or we can even start with what is consciousness? How do you define consciousness?
Okay, so the consciousness, when I give a talk, I usually clarify that people use the term consciousness at least in two ways. One is about levels of consciousness, whether you're awake or asleep or dreamless sleep or under the deep anesthesia or in the vegetative states and so on. So this is the whether you have conscious experience or not type question. And this is also one of the line of research that we are also doing in the lab, like based on the subjective reports of whether you are, dreaming or not. And then you measure the neural recordings at the same time and then see what kind of, difference is there when you are conscious or not, right?
I
So
see.
that's one thing. But the other thing is about the qualitative aspects of consciousness. That's a qualia. What it feels like, feelings, contents of consciousness, and things like that. Perception, thoughts, many things that you are conscious of is all about these aspects. And what is not qualia, what is not contents of consciousness is everything that you are not directly experiencing. So you said that you are interested in memory, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Memories are actually curious kind of things because most of the memory is not consciously experienceable, right? You can remember the episode and the remembered episode itself is experienced by yourself. That's fine. But a memory itself is, sort of a hypothetical kind of a construct. That there must be something that is stored or accessible in our brain, but it's not something that we can directly experience. So this is a distinction. Neural processing, neural activity, that is also not qualia itself. At least in a way, in the way that we can directly experience. It may turn out to be the same, which is one of the philosophical options called identity theories. We experience pain, and then that may be identical to some patterns of the neural activity in particular areas of the brain. But that particular area of the brain's neural activity pattern itself is not something that we can experience. It's not qualia. So that's a two distinction.
And what do you think about this concept of neuromania? I'm sure you've heard of Neil Seth, who I've had on, and a few other people who describe this idea that we're so focused on the brain that is conscious, but we sort of disregard a little bit of the body parts, like as the microbiome or the electromagnetic field and how we interact with the environment, all the complexities of our biology and the complexity of us relating to our environment and light and all this stuff. What do you think about this?
I think there is probably two things to say. So one is that if you want to understand the mechanism or how the things work in general, and you want to have a sort of the story like an explanation of why things are in this way or that way, or if you want to have some kind of efficient explanation or models of how you want to improve things or treat something, then all these kind of connected entities such as biome and gut systems or environment is all crucial, all necessary to understand, right? That is so-called if you think about it as a sort of causal explanation of the things, then there are many layers of the causally, affecting on, let's say you become sick, because you're living in a dirty environment, or, you drank bad, water, or, you ate something really, things, or you are not sleeping, or many kind of factors affects on your sickness, right? So you need to understand all of this to efficiently, treat the sickness, or, to be more active or to be more efficient. On the other hand, if you really want to understand the mechanism or substrate of the consciousness per se, these things are likely to be misleading, because what I'm after, or what I think as an efficient or the ultimate explanation is something that just before this, let's say, phenomenology of redness, right?
Yep.
Whenever I experience redness, then something must also occur at the same time or preceding that. And then you can say that, seeing something at this wavelength in this environment, that's a very important kind of, explanation about seeing redness. And some of the philosophers or biologists would say that, because the ripe fruit tend to be red, that's the reason why you see this thing as red. But this type of explanation is really far from the direct causality. And a direct causality, by that what I mean is that if you stimulate particular part of the brain in a particular way, using electrical stimulation or ultrasound stimulation or things like that, we know that we can overwrite the experience. So, for example, even if you are in front of the blue screen, right? Even at that in that state of the affair, as long as you manipulate the critical part of your brain, so-called color area, in some particular way, then you can experience redness. So that means that you can think about if-then kind of chain of the explanation. If I see a blue screen, then I always see blue. But this is not true, right? Because you can intervene in between, where if I stimulate or if my brain area in this part becomes certain kind of state, then I see red. And this connection is so tight that you cannot intervene anything. But about your mention of the electromagnetism of field, there is a possibility that you can also intervene between the neural activation and the qualia. Same goes for the quantum, hypothesis. So there are many options still right now. But what I'm after is this, very tight causal relationship or co-occurrence of something together with the qualia. And then in that sense, I would say the microbiome or environment is very unlikely to be a good candidate.
Fascinating. Yeah, and then I've seen a lot of talk around this quantum perception and quantum biology, and the word quantum is being used a lot, but it's fascinating to think that there's a lot of people now from different fields, from physics to biologists, all mixing in interdisciplinary ways, and they're having this cross-pollination and discussion, which I really like. I had John Joe McFadden on and a few others, and it's just really good that we have so many people doing what you're doing, which is like, all right, I need to stay focused here and drill down you only have so much time in this life, and you have to focus in and discover what you can with the EEGs and all of the limited technology that we have at this time, and feed it back to a system, which could be in the next 5-10 years, AI systems that then synthesizes all of this information that all of these different specialists are inputting. And in these large language models, I'm wondering how much AI is going to play such a huge role, if it isn't already, at helping us to see patterns emerge that we didn't know, to then get different feedback loops to then study in different ways. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. I also think that you said many things at the same time. I'm not saying
I always
that,
do. I rant a lot.
But let's start with the sort of the interdisciplinary kind of collaboration. Not only consciousness, but I think currently there are many fields of science or social science or philosophy where some kind of problems at hand is possibly solvable if there isn't a great communication and between the fields. And this is something that I experienced, but one of the discovery or breakthrough for me about this consciousness study was the encounter with two persons. One is a mathematician and also a philosopher, and both of them introduced me this mathematical theory called category theory. And if I were kind of in a closed mind, not open-minded, and at that time I was not really open-minded as well. Until I get to know this theory, it was probably difficult for me to also open myself to the quantum theory, and also another type of theories that is also I think useful for resolving so-called hard problem of consciousness. But also, something similar will also probably happen in many different fields as well. But because of the academic structure right now, this kind of thing is not really facilitated. That's one thing. And the second thing is that, as you said, that the AI, large language model, is probably really good at breaking this barrier.
Mm-hmm.
And not only that, but the third point is that the activities of the kind that you are doing, for example, the podcast to the scientist, and also those audience who listen to this type of the discussion, also are unlikely to be a scientist, right, themselves,
Mm-hmm.
but because of this kind of a cross pollination of ideas between completely different fields, I think new things emerge, and better or worse, that's very likely to be promising. Or at least, I'm very interested in the future.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. It's stimulating and it's fascinating, and it's almost overwhelming if you were to really try to conceive of just how incredible it is that you and I can speak from across the world in real time. If you were just to go back 100 years, 50 years, and it would be impossible. And then to share these ideas to people. So who knows what the next 10, 20 years consist of. But I'm very curious about your studies on qualia, because you had one, it was like what it's like to be a bat, or what it's like to be a fly, things like this, and how you structure your studies and what you've discovered so far about this.
Yeah, so I think this is not something that we can directly test right now, but I also don't think it's not a question that is impossible to address in principle, because in the end, what I mean is that what is the possibility, or is it possible for us to become a different entity if we have a technology to alter the substrate of our consciousness, right? This question of what it's like to be a bat may be partially kind of addressable if we have a technology to replace or add the neural circuitry that is exactly working like a brain, and then added into some parts of the brain. And I don't think this is really weird kind of concept or impossible technology into the future, because part of the reason is that there is a medical demand. There is there are classes of the patient, and also me and you can also sustain some kind of damage into the brain in the future. And then if there isn't a technology to replace that damaged brain parts with something artificial, or grown artificially but biological, then this type of the technology might actually start, right? So then if you replace, let's say, auditory areas with bats echolocation like capacity, it's plausible that we can experience bat echolocation.
That would be
And
awesome.
this requires, of course, lots of technology and also theoretical kind of consideration, but I don't see this is impossible task.
Yeah. So what do you think about companies like, obviously the famous one is Neuralink, and these brain stimulation technologies that we use for seizures and other issues? We're already using them to help people that are going through issues. But in the next 5 to 10 years, what is your insight into how that's going, that tech?
I'm not working with them directly, so I don't know. That's the
Mm.
really honest answer. And
Hmm.
I tend to be very skeptical. Again, this is coming to contact with the initial my prediction,
Sure.
right? My innate kind of personality. I almost never believe in what the company says or other scientists say about the future technology. And this
Yeah.
tends to be probably you're almost correct. When I reflect upon myself, since I was a child, almost all the technologies that people have promised or thought it will be useful or needs to be done, almost none of them realize it, right? But
Hmm.
on the course of making something better, usually what happens is that something we already have becomes even better and much nicer. So like as you said, the thing that we had like a telephone
Hmm.
now becomes like this.
Yeah.
That's for free and also with a vision and a better sound quality. That's really amazing, right?
Yeah.
And also something that is that unexpected happens. For example, I always find that the emergence of the YouTuber as a job is something that is I don't think nobody predicted 20 years ago or 30 years ago, and many kind
Right.
of things like that is also happening. So I think what uh, Elon Musk is trying to do and many people are doing is really great, but what I would expect is that many people who see this type of the technology and apply that for a completely different purpose
Sure.
to generate a huge invention and innovation and also creative things. And that's much more probably interesting and also likely to change the world.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems like the tech always turns out to be much different than we expected. And it's very unpredictable. And there's all these unintended consequences. And then it creates new problems and new solutions. And that's sort of the beauty of it, too. But
Right.
I'm very curious about flow states and
Mm-hmm.
meditative states and
Mm,
awareness and
mm,
attention. And I'd
mm,
love to know what you've learned over the years because I've seen a lot of your I've dipped microly into your stuff, but it seems like
mm,
you've studied these fields, and I'd love to know
mm,
because I've laid in float tanks and have had really beautiful states.
mm,
And I've even talked to the head researchers that are neuroscientists that study, say, a sensory deprivation tank and what
mhm,
happens to a person when they're in these
mhm,
different brainwave states and how
mm,
healing
mm,
that can be for the
mm, mm,
body and for the mind. So, what have
mm.
you learned about awareness, attention, and meditation, things like that?
Yeah, so I'm so for several reasons I'm also interested. Uh, One is more sort of the personal uh, kind of a motivation to improve myself, right? And that's
Mm-hmm.
also probably something that you are also interested. And also another one is the phenomenal kind of curiosity, what it feels like to be like that. And then
Mm-hmm.
third is to see whether this is also useful for other people and so on. And overall, I usually try these things at least once or so, and then but in many cases to receive the benefit of this technique, it takes some time and also effort and also commitment, right? Because in the end, you need to change your brain. I think to get the full benefits of this, and it's not that easy to do. So my meditative kind of try, I over the last 3 years or something like that, but I stopped it for 1 year. For example, tried the Wim Hof breathing method
Mm-hmm.
in the morning. It felt good, and then I think it was probably quite positive overall. But I'm not so sure. Yeah, whether I can climb up the very cold mountain without the shirts and so on. But I definitely became much better
Yeah.
for that. And but meditation probably I'm not doing it properly, but it's very difficult, and also I also know that there are lots of studies showing that there's a huge inter-individual difference. So some of them may work for you, but not to everybody. And about you also said that about the flow state, right?
Mm-hmm.
Flow state is probably something that I have been experiencing really like since I was a kid, probably.
Mm-hmm.
Like when you play game, for example, you're in the flow state, and then you don't really, hear the mothers, call for the dinner and so on, and that causes a lot of trouble, right? I mean, flow state is also probably signature of whether you are good at what you're doing, and also keep on doing it is likely to result in something that you are good at in the end. So maybe for you, potentially like editing all these podcast thing puts you into a flow state or something, and then that makes your podcast to be very good and interesting, right? And sometimes I'm also good at some aspects of science, and then I lose the time that happens. So I don't know how to induce it really effectively, but it definitely naturally happens. Yeah.
Yeah. It's an interesting subject, and I've even listened to people who do have, like the Flow Genome Project has a bunch of people that study it, and I found it to be very interesting because what they're trying to do is tap flow on demand, basically, and induce flow states because of how healthy they are for the body and for people's minds. And it's just a curious subject, but there's a lot of things I would love to ask you about, what you know about fear and the response that people get from the amygdala. And I think you've come across probably a lot of work on this field of the brain.
Right. I also listened to probably your episode. I think you talked with the guy who did the float tank, right? Flotation tank.
Yep. Yeah. Dr. Feinstein.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He and I share the same course supervisor. I don't actually interacted. I have never interacted with him directly, personally. But both of us worked with Professor Ralph Adolphs at Caltech.
Yep.
And he was the person who have studied this person in Iowa state, in the United States, who does not have a structure called amygdala in the brain on both sides.
Right.
Which is extremely rare, but there exists a couple of people in the world.
Yeah.
And one of his remarkable finding published in Nature in 1994 was that this person, when shown various different kind of faces of the different emotions, then this person is extremely random in recognizing fear from the face. So this is not the same as experiencing the fear, but Ralph noticed that this person is somewhat strange in terms of fear perception. She cannot understand what the other people are experiencing, especially about the fear.
Wow.
Right? And then subsequent experiment, again also published in Nature and so on, was that when she was shown hundreds of different kind of natural scene picture of the people, right? And then you and I probably can immediately, intuitively feel like, oh, this guy looks really suspicious. And this guy looks very trustable, right? So we can rank the 100 people from, trustable, approachable to, highly suspicious kind of person. She cannot do it at all.
Wow.
It's completely random.
Wow. Yeah, it's all tied to the amygdala then.
Most likely, yes. So, and then subsequent experiment also showed that, and also, around that time, I started to join Ralph's lab as a postdoc, and then I had an opportunity to, talk with and also interact with this person as well. And then, somewhat, casually, I realized that, oh, this person is very special because, when I met her, probably second time or third time in the room, she would kiss me, by approaching, and that's not super, even in California, United States, it's not that, common, right?
Right.
And also, she was very easily, falling in love with, a waiter in some restaurant. So she wanted to go to the same restaurant every day. And she also told me about various kind of, stories like at some point, I think this is already written in some of the work by Ralph's, autobiographical records. But she has an experience of really scary situation, but she never felt anything like related to fear.
Wow.
So then this Feinstein study, one of them was to take her to the horror house, which is composed of many different kind of spiders and ghosts and so many things that usually scares people like hell. But she never felt anything.
Wow.
Except one Nature Neuroscience paper when she was challenged with the CO2. We always feel, almost everybody feels a suffocation, right? And she somehow had an extremely strong reaction to this, suffocation kind of a situation. And then she, for the first time in the life, she felt fear.
Wow.
So this means that, amygdala is not necessary for fearful experience per se, but under the normal situation, without amygdala, probably you can't trigger the experience of fear.
It's almost maybe the evolutionary path too. The amygdala came way later, and that's why the biology responded to the CO2, because that's what drives respiration. So that tapped into survival at a deeper level. Maybe it goes beyond the amygdala, but it still seems like a terrible situation because her risk aversion is so off, and it puts her into a vulnerable situation. So it's like, thank goodness we have the amygdala. It's almost like people that can't experience physical pain get burned really bad. Same thing with the brain.
Yeah. Something like that, yes.
Fascinating. Yeah. What are you working on right now that really inspires you? And is it the Qualia stuff that's most interesting right now? And
yes, I have several major projects, but one of them is definitely the Qualia structure project. And in this, one of the foundational kind of assumption or approach that we are taking is not to try to characterize redness like this one through the verbal report of the red itself, which is just a poor description, right, of delivering what I'm experiencing. And we try to go beyond the previous research. And the previous research, when they try to sort of localize what is the responsible brain region and so on, tend to use a binary decision. Like when you show it very briefly, did you see it or not? That's a sort of the very basic but a very popular kind of consciousness task in the field, right? Another very popular thing is that after showing this, was it red or orange? Something like this, experimenter defined binary choice.
yeah.
And this, binary choice, binary bias is very bad, I would say, in science in general. And that's also deep into the philosophy as well, like idealism or dualism, the materialism or something like that. It's always binary. There is a binary bias. But anyway, what we are trying to do is to present two things, either sequentially or simultaneously, and then ask them to report the similarity. And trying to characterize the relationship between the two experiences. And in the case of the color, red and all possible other colors, and then you ask all possible relationship and similarity. And then you do that for all possible color combinations to understand the structure of the color similarity. Okay. And then this is the foundation of our paper for is my red your red type question. But this can be applied to many things. And I realized that this way of asking a question is actually empirically opening lots of doors. For example, what we are almost like finished is the experience of emotion, right? So when you're seeing some video that evokes, funniness for you, is it actually intersubjectively shared or not? That's an empirical question, but if you just ask how funny it is or how surprising it is and so on, it always kind of projects the experimenters expectation and so on. So it's very difficult to characterize. But if we just extensively and also exhaustively compare the similarity of the evoked experience between pairs of the movies, then you can quantify whether you feel happiness in the same way as I experience as a happiness. This is the kind of the project that globally I'm trying to do.
So a little bit to do with empathy too, and seeing like what the correlation is to be able to experience the same thing. Like if someone's feeling really sad, does that create the response in the other person? And why do some people not have it? And some people are psychopathic. Are they born that way? Or is it a disorder that they develop? Or is it trauma? I'm always fascinated with things like that,
Yeah. I think our approach can possibly it would probably take a really long time, but potentially revise many of these psychological stories and theories that has been proposed so far about, let's say, psychopath and things like that. Because many of the things, this is also some kind of intuition or framework that I learned, and also I have been always suspecting it would be the case from the so-called quantum theory. But many of the psychological studies and biological studies assume that there is a mental state, emotion, color qualia in your experience first. And then I ask you a question, and then you reveal the content of your experience to that question. That is a so-called classical view of the science. You have something that you want to measure, and then experimental scientists can measure that without disturbing this thing itself. But what quantum theory and also quantum mechanics actually revealed is that when you go into the deep in the physics, even outside the world, when things become very small or fragile, then measuring itself changes the state of the things.
Yeah.
Right. So depending on how you measure it from here or here, you get the different answers, but it's not random. And I think this is pretty much the same kind of structure for the psychology as well. Right. If I ask you, are you happy, without any context, you may say yes or no, or with different degree of things. But if I specify the context, or if I measure it in from multiple dimensions, then every question is going to probably influence your state itself.
Yeah.
But not in a random way.
Yeah.
And thinking about this is very significant, also difficult to do, but I think it's doable. And all of these kind of ideas probably relates to also the question of the self, or the feeling in general, right? Like if you start to think about what I'm thinking, am I thinking right now, then that definitely changes your state of thinking itself.
Yeah.
So in general, I've been always interested in how to measure experience with minimal disturbance or including this disturbance. And that is potentially something that has a profound implication for many areas of the psychology.
Yeah. It seems really important, though, to make sure that you're trying to structure these studies in ways that you're having the least amount of influence, because even right now, I've been really fascinated for the last 15 years of, especially in the last 10 years, on the psychedelic studies of what they're trying to discover. But what I've also seen as the issues with their studies is that they are structured in a way that's driving the outcome for a certain parameter, an incentive or whatever it is that they're wanting. And that's probably why it's so hard to study that subjectivity of, and also it can have a negative effect because you're getting people in these super suggestible states, and you're now putting them into these studies, and you're almost driving them into this field of like focusing on trauma or whatever it is that they're focused on from the medical perspective. But if you were to look at it from a different perspective, maybe an ancient culture or an indigenous culture, the way they would approach it is not to approach it that way at all. It would be some sort of initiatory awe and wonder and curiosity and mystical experience that would be a totally different outcome. So anyway, I don't want to derail the conversation, but I could see how important it is when it comes to trying to heal people or create studies, and then being really careful with how you structure these studies.
Yeah, totally. And relating back to what you are interested in, for example, flow,
Mm-hmm.
right? One of the reasons why flow is very difficult to study is that the moment that you ask how focused you are, or how much state of flow you are in, then it disrupts the flow state.
Yep.
So this is exactly the point of the difficulty, right? So
Yeah.
many of the flow state study is asking about flow state afterwards, but that creates this the causal explanation, or how to induce the flow, or how to improve the quality of the flow, very difficult as well.
Sure.
So yeah, there is this is a kind of fundamental difficulty, but also there should be a way to do this. And one of the frameworks in quantum theory that I'm very interested in is so-called instrument theory, which treats the sort of the measurement and its outcome, measure the outcome as well as its change of the state to be completely described as one thing. So it says it's not really like, if you ask something, that the outcome is random, but there isn't a law over there, even at the level of quantum. And, if that's also true for quantum, then it should be also true for probably, like a mental qualia kind of thing. If you ask this, then there will be some kind of effect, but that effect itself is also, predictable.
Right. Yeah. It's good to keep that openness in that regard. Do you like Carl Friston's free energy theories?
Not so much.
No. Okay. Tell me a little bit about what your disagreement is with him, if you don't mind.
I to be honest, I don't really understand. So that's the first thing I should be clear, right? And if you don't understand it, then you can't also like it. I think.
Sure.
And but I have seen, and also I have listened to his talks several times, and so I even talked with him relatively long in one of the conference or workshop. But maybe there are several disagreements about between me and him. One is that his understanding of or appreciation about subjective experience or first person perspective is always kind of fuzzy to me. He introduces many different kind of terms to make things unnecessarily complicated in many cases. But for example, if I ask him to define qualia or consciousness, then he kind of avoids using the term and then introduce the term like sentience or something, right? Probably. I don't know what was your experience, but then not only him. I mean, it's not really about particular person, but the global kind of tradition of behaviorism in science, which is trying to avoid sort of the talking about first person experience, because the first person experience can be different between each person, and therefore it's not possible to replicate easily scientifically, and therefore that it's probably better left out from science. And that's the sort of the decision introduced by, I think, Galileo a really long time ago. And then he recommended science and the engineer to be focusing on more on the so-called intersubjectively shareable third person perspective, third person based evidence. That itself is fine. And these people try to base their theory or their perspective based on this intersubjective shareable kind of thing. But it causes a huge amount of a disturbance and also problem from the start. My first reaction is what happens what if I were completely congenitally blind, right? Then many of the theories about consciousness is likely to be constructed from the sighted people, and then it may not explain anything about your experience. Does it mean that my congenitally blind experience is not scientific? I don't think so at all.
Yeah.
But this kind of majority-based idea produces various kind of terminology such as illusions, hallucinations, or belief, fake reality, or whatever. But for each person, that is the most fundamental kind of starting point, right?
Yeah.
For some people, they claim that the physics laws or mathematical laws is the reality or most fundamental, not undeniable thing. But in reality, many of the people in the world just don't understand it or don't really, even care about that. Then what does it mean is really unclear to me. I mean, every person in this universe, from a child to adults, and also brain damaged people, as well as animals and so on, even plants probably have their own experience.
Mm-hmm.
That's the sort of my default assumption or starting point, rather than kind of assuming that the world already exists and then I participate in that. That
Yeah.
seems really strange as a starting point.
I love this because I actually had Raymond Tallis on. I don't know if you've ever discovered some of his work. He's a brilliant philosopher, but he's really big on talking about and not excluding the subjective experience and going back through history and reading different philosophies and even different ways of perceiving consciousness. At the heart of it, some of the best stuff emerges from the poetry, not the science, right? There's this way of describing the undescribable, the ineffable, but we're all doing our best with these maps, and we use mathematics, and we do have the physics, and we have all these tools, which is amazing. But what happens is it seems that people get locked in on the map and forget the territory, that you're actually experiencing something that's far beyond measurement.
Right.
And if you look at the quantum physics and you then go back to your subjectivity, you can get into certain states of consciousness that would be inconceivable to ever put into any form of language or math. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't study it. It just means that we should still pursue to understand that subjectivity because of the root of suffering. I always think, like you said, if all beings are experiencing a different reality to some slight degree, we should always keep that in mind, that there's also people truly suffering, whether it be schizophrenia or people with major mental health issues or just physical pain and ailments. And it would be nice to discover more about that quantitative and qualitative experience in combination to minimize suffering, if anything.
I can understand it, and I agree with that. But one thing I wanted to also mention about that. What did you say right now?
About the subjectivity being the primal thing to stick to with Raymond Tallis, and thinking about the existential nature of consciousness first, and how immeasurable and ineffable it is to package it and put it into mathematics, and to try to put things into words or mathematics.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now I remember.
Yep.
Okay. The one thing that kind of mind wandered, but this is actually quite an important topic and also potentially interesting, because we haven't talked about integrated information theory at all.
Right.
And you mentioned about the potentially significance of poetry, right?
Yep.
And I think also, in a sense, this is also related to meaning, or the role of the storytelling in understanding, as well as also flow state induced by the conversation like this, rather than reading the text, right? And all of this is, I think, related to the misconception about the concept of information. And information in recent era is supposedly sort of founded by the Shannon's information theory. But Shannon's information theory, from the beginning, Claude Shannon in 1949 or something like that, he said that I'm not going to talk about meaning at all. His information is all about the probability of successful communication of the thing that you want to deliver to receiver, right? And this, mode of the communication is nothing to do with the meaning or experience. And from this perspective, poetry or haiku in Japanese,
Yeah.
which only has like 17 characters, has extremely small meaning, right? Extremely small, communication information, almost none. However, it can deliver a lot. And the reason why is unclear, from the standard information theory point of view or communication point of view. And also it relates to why, the AI can process so much information, but doesn't probably understand anything. And IIT's explanation, which I think makes sense, is that, we experience something by default in all the time. And you can think about it as a sort of shape in your experience. And each of the shape or sub-shape corresponds to some kind of ideas, for example. And some kind of poetry, through the ingenious kind of combination of the words and the shape and things like that, can trigger the same shape between me and you. And also, it can be so powerful that, the delivered kind of stated word can also propagate to other people to generate and proliferate this same shape across many people. And that could be one of the very powerful, meaning of the poetry, or some kind of very effective quotes.
Yeah.
Right. But for something to happen, you also need to consider sort of context or the assumption about, the cultural upbringing and also historical facts and so on, so that, this same 17 characters in Japanese haiku can trigger the same experience between me and you. Most likely you don't speak Japanese, right?
No.
So
I
then,
wish.
no matter what, great poetry in Japanese haiku, I tell you, you don't probably get much. And I also
Right.
don't appreciate most of this. But sometimes, this kind of super small subset of the things can trigger really rich experience. And sometimes it's called a transformative experience. Like, not only poetry, but also actual direct experience of psychedelic and so on can also change your life, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like even a good Zen koan, I love reading those, and it's powerful, but I'm reading it in English, like you said, and if I was to read it in a different language and I grew up in a different culture, maybe it would be a different experience. So there's so much to that.
Right.
But it would be cool in the future if we could use AI, which I'm sure we will, in ways that we could immediately transfer and change that language to make it subjectively similar for each person across cultures. Maybe not, because there's so many variables of cultural upbringings and different, things in my filter that would maybe make it a less response than someone else, of course.
Yeah. I think, this is another thing that I also wanted to make comments about, before I got stuck. Sameness or shareable experience is, in general, good. I agree. And also minimizing suffering, I also agree that, is generally a good thing. But I don't think we need to be extreme about this. For example, we don't need to share everything with everybody. And also we don't need to minimize suffering at any cost. I don't think, all the suffering is bad, actually. For example, the study of the stress says that this is still like, kind of a broad stroke kind of, statement. But if you are facing with a stress that is chronically present and you cannot overcome or you cannot control, for example, dealing with the, unreasonable systems rule, or dealing with somebody you really hate, but as a boss, right? This is a chronic stress, and that doesn't probably do any good for your brain or physique. But doing some kind of exercise or doing some kind of, mentally very difficult thing, like solving a puzzle or reading a very difficult paper or, accomplishing something very difficult, it's a stress that you can overcome. And that makes you stronger. And sometimes this could be coming from outside, like, somebody, very close to you dies, and then you are really depressed, but it's something that you can also try to overcome at some point, right?
Yeah.
And many of the really big grief even is said to be recoverable in 7 years. So I think this is really fundamental kind of, thing. And just removing all this, suffering will never, for example, prevent any foreseeable suffering that, unavoidably happens in the future, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then removing all this suffering from kids and so on will make them really weak.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, so
The coddling of the mind, they say. I think it was, I forget who wrote that, but yeah, things like that where we've actually created the easiest time in human history, but we have the most amount of mental health issues because of that in a way. So I could see where living in a world that's too soft and too stress-free is actually the worst idea, because our bodies and our minds were made for stress, like good stress, and to overcome stress. And we have to actually now, because it is so easy, we have to jump in the cold, or we have to do the intense hike or create stress on purpose because we don't have it in the environment anymore. So we have to go to gyms and things. Like if you showed someone 200 years ago a gym, they'd think, what the hell happened,
Right.
So I could see that.
Yeah. And in that sense, it's very interesting that Stoicism, championed by Seneca and also Marcus Aurelius, and they are the really rich people, but they were thinking about the death that can come to you, at any point, and also death of your kids and things like that. That's really really horrible. But thinking about this makes you kind of mentally strong, and also healthy. I think that's probably true.
Yeah, I agree. I actually love Stoicism. I love reading Seneca and Marcus Aurelius, many Stoics, and then I love reading a lot of Buddhist texts, a lot of Eastern philosophy. Same thing, where it's all about narrative and that logos therapy that came from Viktor Frankl. Those types of things are maybe not quite measurable in a lab scientifically, but the power of story and choosing our relationship, if we have free will at all, which we could get into what your thoughts are around will. It's a big subject, but if we have any will at all, one of them is to choose our narrative and our relationship to our story, which gives meaning. And it doesn't mean that you choose one that's delusional. It means that you choose a truthful narrative that has some form of opportunistic value to it, that gives you a meaning that's maybe going to help you get through this life, and looking at death as an opportunity to appreciate the present or things like that. So what do you think about that as far as free will and narrative and choosing narrative like the Stoics did when they had that hierarchy of needs met?
So about the free will, my starting point is again the same kind of attitude for consciousness or qualia, but I just can't deny my free will, and it's also varying degree of freedom I can have about, for example, let's start with some kind of choice, right? Under some kind of social constraint, for example, I cannot become naked in front of the street just over there because of my biological, psychological, and so societal kind of implication. So in that sense, I don't have a complete free will. But for the things that doesn't matter, like raising a hand right now or later, or left and right, this kind of thing is something that I can just do freely. And the order of the explanation should come from, I have this free sense, and how does it supported by the brain. But many of the current, physicists or biologists or psychologists think in the other way around, right? Starting from this, third person, intersubjective shareable kind of evidence, to say that, because molecules and neurons are such and such, therefore there's no room for free will, this direction. But I think this is really misdirected, because many of the evidence is coming from some kind of very controlled experiment, and so potentially repeatable thing, but not about my free will, which is also, unique and momentary, one shot by one shot. And some of the free will decision is not repeatable as well, right?
Yeah.
So for that, what kind of science can be actually done is really unclear. we could prepare some kind of situation where hundreds of thousands of people face the same thing. Let's say, you get married with this person or that person, controlled in terms of the, let's say, attractiveness or something like that. But even with that, you can't definitely predict everybody's behavior from the brain scan and the brain activity and connectivity and all the psychological traits. So I think it's just doomed. And also, empirically speaking, denial of the free will doesn't go anywhere. So my approach is, to just face with the fact about, the fact that I have a free will. I have a qualia of free will.
Yeah.
And I want to explain that.
Yeah.
And for that, again, integrated information theory explanation actually makes more sense than anything else so far right now, I would say. But what it basically says is that when the decision actually involves lots of concepts or lots of shape, related to potential alternatives, and also potential to reflect on that, and also potential to change your course of action into the future. When there is something like that, then the more you have it, one given experience, one given decision feels more free. So, for example, about you're starting this radio or podcast, right? You had a choice of not doing it, and because of that, you definitely feel like, oh, this is your free will, this is your intention, this is your freedom to start this, right?
Yeah.
And if the constraints on hurdle of that decision was harder and harder, you also feel like, oh, this was definitely my decision, not automatic, because it was harder to initiate. For example, you could have used this time for getting some kind of certificate or making more money, and you're under the pressure to earn money. Then the more so, your decision to start this podcast is a very free will decision. But if it's like kind of habit, automatic, like you brush your teeth tonight, that feels really not a free will, because it is coming from the kind of the concepts and also experience that is not attached to anything before and after, and also alternative, right?
So where does it go from there as far as this IIT perspective with habits? So you're saying basically if you're in habit, which we're habitual beings with physical habits and our mental habits that have been created over our lifetime, and maybe many lifetimes if you look at our genes unfolding, we come through with all these old patterns. But you're saying that the most qualitative experience of free will is when we finally feel that we're breaking that mold a little bit, where if we're seeing something just outside of that. And so the opportunity comes to then, if we know that we're just habitual thinking and being, we have this little slice of an opportunity to use what little idea or experience of free will we have to induce and create new patterns, right? Physical or mental. We could create new thought patterns that are maybe healthier or something, or we could create new physical habits and start getting up at a different time and doing something completely different. Is that part of it? Am I getting on track with some of this?
Yes, and this is something that I'm also not super kind of developed in my own thinking. So take it for not too seriously, but this balance between the habit and also intentional kind of act at the level of the decision, and also automaticity of seeing something, and we see things and experience without really attending to something and so on, seems to be kind of contradictory to each other. Like at the level of the decision or movement, you need some kind of attention and also memory to execute something with your conscious will on one hand, but on the input side, sensory side, many of the things actually come to you, and you feel, you experience it regardless of attention or regardless of memory. But when you attend to that, you can later report on your experience to other people. So, but many of the consciousness theories and psychological theory treats the role of a consciousness, a role of the attention on consciousness in a more uniform manner, and that causes a lot of problem and also confusion. At the level of outside kind of out of the behavior level, I think it's probably clear that attention or intention really matters for your conscious experience of your decision.
Yeah.
But on the input side, it matters less. And why it is so, it's not super clear at the moment. But I would say that some of the framework that IIT has starts to speak some kind of explanation. It is more to do with the substrate, network connectivity and also states in the sensory side is optimized or generally really good at generating lots of so-called integrated information. You can't just split the brain in easy way. But more of the frontal part, which is related to cognition or thinking, concepts, planning, and so on, seems to be more like a dividable into parallel stream. And you need to choose one pathway to execute through something. And that difference makes it, frontal area to be less probably optimized for integratable, kind of a structure. But the back of the brain or sensory experience is more difficult to divide and also generate this structure or shape.
It's fascinating. Yeah, it makes me think too that novelty plays a big role, and having a little bit of it but not too much, but also having safety and security or whatever, to some degree, the hierarchy of needs being met. Because if you're in scarcity mode or you're in fear of survival, that's where you lack, say, creativity or freedom to explore and have the imagination, or even maybe when you think of a monk or someone who spends a lot of time meditating or in these super states of awareness, mindfulness, if you will, even on the most basic level of just paying attention, like you're saying, non-judgmentally, and just becoming more identified with that observer part of ourselves, I think creates a little space to have more opportunity to then select for where we then place our attention based on all those integrative patterns you're talking about. But
right. So that actually relates to sort of the problem I have with the predictive coding type explanation. Anil Seth or Carl Friston probably talked about the importance of prediction, right?
They did,
or expectation or prior belief. But my question to them always is that look at this let's say MTV style kind of flashing picture of the commercial or something like that. Even if you never have seen each of the things before, right? And even if each of them is flashed really quickly, you see it.
Yeah.
Without expectation, without prediction, you see it. And okay, then if you say that, oh yes, it's because it breaks your prediction, it breaks expectation. That signals importance, and therefore you experience it. And if you believe that story, then story becomes that what you do not expect and very important is something you experience.
Right.
But on the other hand, the same person, same theorists also say that what you experience is what you predict. So it's a completely opposite kind of a, explanation. And that's because in the end, if you introspect your everyday experience, you probably realize that sometimes you experience things that are not predictable. Sometimes you experience things that you predict, right? So from that perspective, prediction or expectation modulates a little bit about what you experience, especially in the sensory domain, but not really about, not alter or, determine the contents of experience. It's a really, kind of misdirected way to think about, consciousness or qualia, I think.
Yeah, it seems like it's maybe just a small version of a possibility, but it's not the answer, or it's not like
Right.
a unified theory of any kind. But
Yeah.
consciousness just is so hard to pin down. And that's why I love talking to people like you and Carl and all these folks, because everyone's
Mm.
studying it from different vantage points.
Mm.
And they all, like I said in the beginning, it seems like we come back with a lot of disagreements, and
Mm.
people that have
Mm.
studied it for their whole lives
Right.
still are quite uncertain about the nature of consciousness, which is to
Yeah.
me making it more interesting and more fun to learn even further, you know?
Yeah. I agree. And in terms of meditation, now I
Mhm.
now remember also, you might like. Have you heard of the Kitaro Nishida?
What did he write?
He is a Japanese philosopher who already died,
Yeah.
who was living in the beginning of the Meiji era until the end of the World War II.
Mm.
And he was probably the first proper philosopher in Japan, and he was very original as well. He did lots of Zen practice and some meditation, and he
Okay.
read a lot about Kant and Hegel and also all the thoughts of the philosophies in the Western philosophy at that time. But
Mm.
also he thought about things in a very deep manner. And then in his case, he started his philosophy from the pure experience, where you don't even know whether the subject and the object is different.
Mm-hmm.
And this is probably very difficult for the English speaking people. But to me, it comes really natural. Partly because it is the structure of the language. In Japanese, it is very straightforward and also very common to omit subject.
Mm.
So when you describe the situation of like something, the bell was kind of rang, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then in English, usually you say, I heard the sound of the bell.
Yeah.
But in Japanese, more common things to say is that the bell, the sound of the bell was heard. It's more like passive kind of point of view, and even more natural to say that the sound of the bell or sound or or something like that. That becomes like almost like haiku.
Yeah.
And then there, the experience is not really subject experiencing the world. Do you know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
So
I love this. It's
yeah.
like it's more of a fluid. There is no separation of you and the experience and the bell. And so you guys are, it sounds like the structure of language is actually shaping the way that two people experience something, because one takes me and separates it. Now I'm describing that subject, which I've always been fascinated with subjectivity. And that's why I do like reading a lot of the Eastern texts, because you guys
Yeah.
do flip it around, which then can allow, I think, if you were to meditate, I'd love to get his name again and some books that you recommend. I will definitely
Mm,
dive in.
mm,
But I feel like if you were to take that perspective and then go sit silently by the
mm,
creek or wherever,
mm,
it almost, the language can also transcend your capacity to experience it differently. So you
mm,
can experience reality much differently than, say,
mm,
a Westerner, because of your language too,
mm,
right?
mm, mm, mm. I think that's roughly what I'm also thinking about as well. The Western philosophy and also theorizing tend to probably overemphasize the role of the rationality and also the reasoning, right? But the meditation and so Eastern philosophy probably puts more emphasis on the experiential quality, and that's what probably many of the meditative exercises ask you to do, right? Like let's say paying attention to your body,
Mm-hmm.
touch, and also the vision and hearing, and then try not to think, and then
Exactly.
that's the one of the very fundamental training in the Buddhism that Buddha actually said not to react to things. And then if you can attain that kind of state of the mind, which is also very difficult for me, when disturbing thing happens, then you can start to realize that you can put in a space between what happened and then what you're reacting, and then that leads to solution and so on, right? That's probably what you also learned from the Buddhism, I guess.
Yeah, I love that indifference and the ability to become more identified with the observer,
Hmm.
and that separation between creating an obvious narrative right away. Instead, you're sort of looking at it and seeing it. I guess awareness itself is such a beautiful subject, and Anthony de Mello and a few others have written beautifully about it from different perspectives that come from meditative states, and then they use language to try to, transmit that to others. But it's something that you have to experience, I suppose. I've even had some incredible states. That's actually what got me on this path years ago, was I hadn't been reading books at all. I didn't even know what meditation was, but I was laying in those float tanks and having these incredible experiences, very rich experiences. And then I would go and read about them and learn and reverse engineer and discover, oh, people have been studying these states for many years. I'm not stumbling upon it for the first time in human history at all. This is like a really rich environment that isn't really looked at too much in the West. And it's not easy to measure and put into that rational mind state, So I do appreciate this perspective.
So for you, the trigger of this kind of journey has been the flotation tank?
Yes, and different non-ordinary states through different plant medicines and things like that. And breath work has also become a really powerful tool. Like you said, you did some Wim Hof. I've been practicing many different types of breath work for many years that gets you into these different states. And I find exploring consciousness subjectively to be more interesting to me than what I'm doing even here with you. I love reading books now, and I love learning from others, but I always go back to the subjective felt present of the experience itself as being primal, as you were describing.
Yeah. That's definitely very interesting to hear. And the recently, I'm also kind of thinking that the openness as a personality and as an attitude is also very important, and that's something potentially this type of the consciousness study can also teach us or lead us to be the direction to go as a kind of the humanity potential, not really resolving the contradiction or not resolving some kind of issues that as we discussed about the suffering or the other types of stress and so on. So this Nishida's theory, I'm not also 100% really familiar with his very difficult kind of theory, but his theory also contrasts against Western thinking of the Hegel's dialectic. Do you know about Hegel?
Yes.
Like Hegel says that there is when there's a contradiction or competition between these kind of theories, by taking some aspects of the truth from both of these, and then you can get the better one. And then that's the way how the human develops, and so the culture develops and so on, to make the things better and better, right? This is kind of too simplistic. And I think the real world doesn't go like this way in many ways, but sometimes the contradiction or uneasiness will remain, but they have to live together. And then sometimes this kind of combination of the very uneasy things may find some really nice combination to become like a really great thing, but it's not always the case, and it's not always it's by default it doesn't happen. And this is probably also true for the biology and also evolution. Like you probably would know, but mitochondria, it was a part of the completely different organism before.
Yeah.
And recently I learned the organism called the light chain. Do you know about this?
Yeah, and I actually have Nick Lane coming on in 2 days, who's like super
really?
deep into mitochondria, which will be fun. But
yeah, all of these things, just sometimes without resolving this contradiction, just combining things, and then somehow it works, and sometimes it doesn't, and it's super interesting. But that's a fact of the reality. And then, I think Nishida's philosophy here is also potentially interesting. It's difficult to get a whole picture, but I also, so this could be a completely separate kind of topic. But what I learned as one of the most significant kind of a concept through quantum theory and also category theory, mathematics, is the concept of locally consistent but globally inconsistent.
Okay.
And this is, I think this is basically the default state of the world. You know, when the easiest example is this Escher's stair or Penrose triangle. Do you know about this kind of figure?
Yes, I can see the figure. Yeah.
Yeah, something like, that people are, climbing up the
Yeah.
stair and then climbing up, but then, it seems like infinite.
Yep.
Doesn't make sense. But this comes from the fact that the human visual system has a higher resolution at the fovea and when you are attending to. So locally, everything is consistent. And then when you patch this, locally consistent information to global, picture, sometimes globally it doesn't make sense. And this is probably true for politics, right?
Sure.
Or, you talk to each person, it makes sense. When you talk with Anil, it makes sense. You agree. And when you talk to me, you also agree. But somehow, when I talk with you and Anil, three-way, maybe, it doesn't make sense. And this is probably not a bad thing. And world politics or, the state of the affair is this kind of contradiction or unresolvable controversy is the source to make things, into the next step. Better or worse, but that's the way it works. And assuming that the world makes sense, globally coherent, is just false, and also it leads to kind of misunderstanding of the world structure.
Yeah, I think it's always not obvious, but it always seems obvious to me that any grand unified theory of consciousness or about the nature of the reality, the universe, is false because it's stuck in a microfilter of what we know now with our limited capacity to seek to understand. Because the complexity already, just when you just sit quietly with yourself on the subjective level, that you're having an experience of awareness. But then when you start to read and learn and explore the environment, it only gets bigger and more interesting. It doesn't get refined down to one unified theory, I don't think, other than it's going to get weirder and more interesting and more complex.
Yeah.
So I think that's beautiful. And I've always been very curious because I'm adopted and I grew up in a household with a different biological sister with the same household. I was always fascinated with nature, nurture, and learning about why am I so different than my sister, say, and what were the variables. And so I think exploring consciousness and being curious about the nature of consciousness in and of itself is a value system. It's like, you don't have to want to know the whole end all be all story at the global big level. You can just be curious and interested in the nature of self and the world. And it leads to many, many, many more things. It's like, it doesn't have to be to get the end big, grand, because people go, what are you exploring that for? And it's like, because it's interesting. That's why. So
yeah, I think that's, probably good idea, a good philosophical standpoint, I think.
Yeah. And I'm curious real quick, I don't want to hold you up too long, but what do you think of telepathy? Have you studied it or looked into any of this remote viewing type stuff that people have explored?
Yeah, so about the telepathy of several kinds, I'm very skeptical. For example, like out-of-body experience and so on. There has been a study and also even prospective study on doing that. And then we probably have a good idea of when out-of-body experience emerge from the brain science point of view, like when there's a stimulation and also disturbance on the temporal areas, then like epileptic states, then the body coordination and how you feel body where is disturbed with respect to how you are seeing, and that result in this kind of a weird conscious experience of the out of the body experience. But it doesn't necessarily mean that your soul or viewpoint is physically up, right? So the clever experiment that they did was that putting some kind of sign or symbol on top of the shelf, so that people cannot actually see from the bed,
right?
And then when the out of the body experience is induced, and then they claim that they see it, but then when they report the shape, it's completely random. And some of the interesting study I recently saw was that people seem to be able to train themselves to, induce out-of-body experience, actually, almost like a lucid dreaming.
Yes.
And then with this controlled out-of-body experience, this kind of flotation to see the symbol is also not possible, right? So that is not really something that I'm curious. But recently, in the consciousness conference at TSC, I met with these two independent groups of the presentation on the training of the people who see things in a complete blindfold. And that evidence was really strong, and I'm very curious that we can probably see things with a blindfold.
Mm-hmm.
But my sense or my working hypothesis about this phenomena is that it's plausible that we have a residue of some kind of visual receptor through the skin,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not used normally, but under some kind of training procedure and also plasticity, we may be able to see things through the receptors in the skin.
Yeah.
And if that has been the case, not only these kids and the people who are trained in this two institute, but in the past, it's plausible that some of the people are seeing things in a different way, literally, than the normal people. And that may have led to the claim about, clairvoyance or some kind of, things that some particular people can see things. And also, I have a very strong kind of, suspicion or almost conviction that, people who sometimes talk about the aura of other people maybe also, again, physically explainable because of the synesthesia kind of, explanation. For example, when I see your face, or when I feel your presence, that kind of, information may lead to simultaneous excitation of my brain to color your background in a red way or a purple way or a black way or something. And then it may be the case that that may be related to some kind of unperceivable health condition for you, but some people can actually see as a color, not as a sort of your own sound or vision per se, but it's almost like a health meter for somebody.
Yeah.
And then that may be also related to this, telepathy kind of stuff. Like, people don't speak about anything, but, other people can just sense what you're thinking in some way. And also another type of the telepathy phenomena that I'm also really curious is the report about this almost like telepathy thing between the identical twins or autistic kids.
Yeah.
These seems to be there seems to be something about it.
It's fascinating. I was listening to Telepathy tapes. It's recent, and they're doing some incredible studies right now, and it's just like blowing the lid off of some of this stuff. I think it's all new, newer studies, because they finally are catching on to so many autistic children that just have these different phenomena or these different abilities to perceive information or to perceive reality differently. But it'll be interesting to see what comes of it,
Yeah, I'm really open to it, and I'm skeptical for both sides, right?
Yeah.
The people who are skeptical about these, phenomena, I'm skeptical about them.
Yeah. No, it's just about the nature of reality.
About the phenomena itself as well. So
yeah. Yeah, and it's like all the CIA's always had these remote viewing programs, and I'm always curious about how much have they learned and how much can they train and how does it work? It's just interesting. Consciousness being maybe non-local, and that there's more something to do with the field. But I don't know. And I'm skeptical like you, but I also go into it with an open mind, because I think when you have an openness and a skeptical, healthy skeptical mind, curiosity and openness does lead to experiential data too. So it's almost like you can't have access to some of these capacities if you close your mind off to it as well. Like seeing an aura or seeing light and perceiving light isn't available if you don't see the person as a light
Exactly.
body, because you are emitting light. You are light to some degree. I mean, that's what we all are at the base level.
Right.
And so it's interesting to start thinking of the world as light. You might now start opening up your capacity to see a little bit more of it in some way. But
Yeah, empirically, in fact, this kind of openness also, is beginning to be also studied in some real life experiment. And one of the things that I always teach to the student is this study of the openness on the money. This is very interesting. Some of the, I think the author of the book was Wiseman in UK. He did the study of the people who are really lucky versus who are very unlucky.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they, observe the behavior, these lucky people tend to find the, money, £5 on the street, but on the same location of the street, if you put money, these unlucky people tend to actually miss it.
Yeah, that's
And
fascinating.
yeah, it's fascinating. And I can also see that during the lecture, I also do something similar in a lecture, right? Saying that, if you notice this, comment, I'll give you the point for free. But, I asked the student to do other tasks during this, presentation.
Yeah.
And then, somebody who just raised a hand, who noticed this sign, I just stop this experiment and then I just give you the points to that. But these students tend to be actually also, really correlated with a high score in that lecture,
Yeah.
because they are probably paying attention and so are open to the possibility than what you're supposed to. And then they are likely to be leading to the new discoveries. So yeah, I think this openness kind of stuff has a real physical basis, and also it's also has a very strong implication to the life. And I'm also actually, towards the end, I was curious about your interest or connection to the CIA.
Yeah,
because
I have so many podcasts on it.
Right. I was very curious.
Well, I'm an agent. No, I'm just kidding. No, because when I get curious about the nature of consciousness, and then you get interested in the fact that we all have been conditioned by our society and our culture and our education system and whatnot, and a lot of us is indoctrination or education. When I was laying in those tanks and starting to explore my own subjective, like, well, who am I and what am I and how do I think and where does it come from? You start to see that you're just a bunch of collective downloads almost to some degree. A lot of our thinking comes from society. So I started to want to really get to the base of it. Well, anyway, what I discovered was that there's people that socially engineer. They do understand the psychology and they do understand the neuroscience, and there's military budgets and there's all these things. And you're going, wow. So a lot of our commercials and all of the propaganda films and all the things, it's all driven based on psychology and the understanding of the mind. So I just like to understand the nature of social engineering, and it's fascinating. It's really a curious subject. It's one of the most interesting, I find.
Yeah, I'm totally really curious about it. And the also the fact that this kind of thing is also very strongly also true for scientists as well. So as a kind of litmus test, you can probably also test, whether they are open to this kind of thing. And then many people are really skeptical about, those things that they don't know even. Many things just as a matter of fact, we don't know much, right?
Yeah. That's a beautiful starting point. And then you start to realize that when you don't know much, you get to learn more if you're humble enough, right? And
exactly.
I found like Tom O'Neill, who studied the Charles Manson murders, and he was being manipulated he didn't mean to, but the guy spent 20 years writing a book on Charles Manson in the 1960s and MK Ultra. And it's like, that's fascinating that we had our own intelligence agencies creating operations to see if we could create some form of cult or psychopath and it's really interesting. It doesn't mean that I subscribe to it or anything. I just find all things. And I'm just curious. That's why I call this podcast Wonder Junkie, because I'm full of wonder.
I see. Yeah. So as to that, that the thing that I always also, kind of cautious about it is so-called the storytelling bias.
Mm-hmm.
Once we understand that consciousness is so rich and language is so poor, but you also understand that people can be convinced easily, or when the effective poetry can implant the image to you almost like
Yeah.
instantaneously,
Mm-hmm.
then the most effective medium of talking about the actual thing that happened is really the story, which is well tailored. So
Mm.
most of the things in the world is just super complicated, and the perspective or viewpoint exists for the as many human beings that there are at a given time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so all these CIA or stuff, and so Kennedy assassination and so on, unless you are the actual person, you don't know the whole
Yeah.
picture. And this locally consistent, globally inconsistent kind of perspective also allows you to tolerate with the inconsistency of one evidence to the other.
Yeah.
Usually these kind of inconsistency needs an higher level kind of explanation.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that you realize that this and this looks contradictory because I was not aware of this kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing. But the danger of that is also, the higher level explanation also starts to be more arbitrary and less constraining in terms of theory. And that is basically the problem of the conspiracy theory, right?
Yeah.
But I always think, because I know I do some kind of organization by myself, conspiracy or the kind of the secret manipulation of the other people does exist,
Oh, yeah.
right? As you say,
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of social engineering.
Mm-hmm.
And because these people cannot tell all the story, it's necessary kind of consequence.
Yep.
But it's not the case that everything is told is also true. So that's
Yeah.
an interesting thing. It's never
Yeah.
possible to find out.
It's fun to explore and not subscribe to it. I think the reason
Oh.
I give myself permission to explore weird things and keep going is because first of all, I don't subscribe to it and think, oh no, I better do something about it. There's no fear, or it's more just curiosity. And
Wow.
I think it's helpful because a lot of people I don't think should explore these things. Like I wouldn't want I wouldn't want my mother doing that. It wouldn't be good for her. But yeah, it's a fascinating subject. I'd love to know real quick who inspires you that's alive today, and who also inspires you that's dead. Those writers that have really sparked your curiosity over the years.
I usually don't list these kind of people because the moment, at least the people who are living, if I start to respect, I also cannot naturally respect disobey their story or hypothesis, right? Like that many people actually do not disagree with the Carl Friston because they are afraid of it, right?
Oh,
And also
interesting.
it's true also for my collaborator, and also the integrated information theory proposed is proposed by Giulio Tononi. But if I start to respect him, I also can't disagree with him. And this conviction comes from my also background in Japanese. And in Japan, a professor or teacher needs to be called as a sensei.
Mm-hmm.
And I really hated it. Because if you understand the Chinese character of what the sensei means, it just means that you are born before. That's it.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
That forces you to kind of, be a student.
Yeah.
The fact that, somebody was just born before you doesn't mean anything, right? Like Seneca said, many people just live the life in vain. So most people do not even live. So why do I need to actually pay attention to these people? So I'm very skeptical, and also I'm also at the same time I'm also in a sense it sounds contradictory, but I'm also equally respecting pretty much everybody and so every animals and also everything,
Mm-hmm.
because they are
Interesting.
themselves really just amazing. And I don't really understand it.
Yeah.
Past
And
and
some
future and now, yeah.
and some inspire us, I guess, throughout our journey, maybe some of the Stoics or some of these philosophers, they can spark you or give you a little fuel that makes you curious, but you don't have to necessarily put a hierarchy on it or think that there's no form of power,
Yeah. And also, I might also change as well, right?
Yeah.
And so...
Hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully. And for example, I probably didn't understand much about Buddhism or Seneca or, Nishida. Unless I also, got a lot of struggles over the last several years. Like I mentioned a little bit about, Qualia structure project. And also, I also should have said that, my entrance to Caltech as a PhD student was not really a, easy journey. I was rejected basically by 8 US grad school from Kyoto University. And then, but I still, went to Caltech to do the volunteer research for the crazy amount. And then my previous boss, Christoph Koch, said that, you seem to be promising. So why don't you, apply for Caltech? And then they said that, but you already rejected me. And then he discovered my application like this. Oh, there he is. And then I was lucky to get in. So all of these kind of things happened in my life. And so this kind of, unconquerable kind of stress made me strong. And so recently really open to many different kind of possibilities. So that's very interesting.
No, it's very interesting. I think it's great. It seems like you're a bit of a rebel in a healthy way, I like the rebels, the intellectual rebels.
Yeah.
So I know you got to get going. If you were going to die today, is there anything you'd want to share with the world if it was the last time you could speak?
I think I pretty much exposed many of the recently interesting and also fascinating idea to you. But one thing that I'm also very interested these days is this book called Dawn of Everything. Have you heard of this?
No, I haven't.
That's also probably life-changing kind of book for me recently. It's written by David Graeber and David Wengrow, and it doubts and also puts a different kind of story about enlightenment and all the Western civilization afterwards. And the content is probably disturbing to many of the, Western thinkers that, all these, peace, equality, and love kind of, concept is basically borrowed or taught by the Native American Indians, not the Enlightenment thinkers, invention.
Wow. I'd love to read it. Is that a newer book?
I think it was published like several years ago. And some people know about it. But this mathematician, Hayato Saigo, recommended me. And I find it really fascinating, changing and completely, disturbing all the, common sense. So.
Oh, I love that. Cool. I'll be sure to check it out. Well, I really appreciate your time. You're so fun to talk to. And it was really fun.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You are as well. Yeah. Thank you for listening.
Absolutely.
Thank you for listening to the episode. Be sure to subscribe to the show on Spotify, YouTube, and iTunes, and rate the show. I hope you enjoyed the episode.
What we call reality is in fact nothing more than a culturally sanctioned and linguistically reinforced hallucination.